Hi, I am Dr. Kirti Ranchad. I am a neurologist focusing on brain health in order to reduce the risk of certain illnesses such as depression, dementia, anxiety, and in order to develop core brain skills such as creativity, calm, empathy, and focus. Skills for better health, better relationships, and a better life. The focus of this series of talks is what we have within our traditions, our cultures, our ways of living, which support better brain health and healthy aging. Today, I'm excited to be hosting Brazilian psychologist and associate professor Danilo Silva Guimarães. We will discuss wisdom and approaches to health within Indigenous Brazilian communities. I'm really excited to be hosting this discussion with Danilo, whose work focuses on the history and philosophy of psychology, including Indigenous psychology, and he has published a book on the principles of Indigenous psychology. Welcome, Danilo. Thank you for joining me on this discussion on the value of our traditions and our cultures in terms of health and healthy aging.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Kitty.
What do you think the role of our cultures and our traditions, like our ways of living, are in actually promoting health? Because if you look at it, health is not separate from the way we live, and this is really rooted in our cultures. So yes, your opinion on that, given the work you do.
I think as a psychologist working with indigenous people here in Brazil, and also as an indigenous person, that culture is very important for the healthy way of living. Each culture has a way to think what is the healthy way of living. The meanings we create in community is very important. Here in Brazil, for instance, we have an understanding that if a community can keep the proper way of living, their traditions, their rites, food, and also their traditional practices, when a community is able to keep it, this community is more healthy in the sense of what Western society calls mental healthy. It's very important to consider all the understandings these our indigenous traditions have. Some ritualized practices that are very important to cultivate a healthy body. It concerns daily practices and also some practices that are in some periods of the year. And all these are very important.
Are you able to give me an example of a daily rite or ritual that would actually promote health, and why do you think it promotes health? Or how does it promote health?
We have in the communities I work with here in São Paulo, that's from the Guarani people, for instance, they have a meeting they make every day. In the end of the day, our community come together in the Opu, that's the main house of the community, and they sing, dance. There is a moment in which they open the speech of any person from the community to talk, addressing all the community. So they use this moment also to talk about very important issues they need to reflect on, and also to decide how the community will face the challenges they have. So this moment of meeting, singing, dancing, and also having comfortable talks and also very serious talks. It's a moment in which they are very attentive to each other. If there is something get wrong in the community, how to solve it together. And also it's very democratic in the sense that any person that wants to talk is able to talk. Doesn't matter if it's a woman or if it's a man or if it's young or if it's old. If you want to talk, if you feel the need to talk and addressing this talk to all the community, the speech is open and there is a very respectful attitude. So for me, it's a very important, it's a daily right or ritual that's very important for a healthy way of living.
And listening to you speak and just describing that process of meeting every day as a community gathering with, like you say, music and dancing and that freedom to speak and across generations. And as I was doing this work, as I was telling you before, you know, a lot of what actually promotes health and healthy aging, you've discussed there. There's lots of research now on the benefits of music, the benefits of dance in promoting health and healthy aging, how it affects your brain, and the power of intergenerational activities and intergenerational living, and actually how that promotes health, social cohesion, because there are places in the world where there's an epidemic of loneliness and they're trying to combat loneliness. Whereas this community obviously has lots of structures in place to make sure that the community stays cohesive and supportive. And this intergenerational activity is built into the cultural fabric of the way people interact with each other. So it sounds so wonderful as a community. How do you think it actually promotes psychological well-being? Like, what are the psychological tools you get from being in that system, firstly? And the second one is going back to what you referred to as better mental health from a Western perspective. So why did you say that? Why is that important to differentiate?
And that's a very important question because psychology is a field of knowledge and also a profession. It's grounded in the tradition of Western people. When I talk about Western people, I'm talking about European people and mainly about Greek and Roman, Judeo and Christian people. It grounds also the methodologies or the practical work of the psychologist. When you ask me how this Amerindian indigenous environment or how this indigenous community create psychological abilities, or for us it's a little bit a weird question because from the understanding of our indigenous tradition, we don't use this term psyche. We don't actually understand what's happening in through this theoretical or epistemological system. We have our ways to understand what's going on in the community and our, we could say, our proper concepts based on our cosmology. So we have a conflict when a professional from the psychological field go to the community in order to promote healthy support or mental health support. And he or she faces a community that has a way of living and promoting a healthy way of living. And I'm saying a healthy way of living because we have in Portuguese, that's the language, the main language in Brazil, the notion of healthy, that's a sort of substantive, you know, it's something like as if a person is a healthy person, or individualistic and substantiate sometimes what is healthy.
Yeah.
As if we could have a description, a very solid and fixed description. But in the communities, we have an understanding that health is a way of living. It's not something you have, it's not a property of someone, but it depends on the way of living. And it's a way of living together with the others in the community and also together with the others in the environment, considering the trees, the river, the animals, and the land. And so it's a very complex understanding. It's different from what we usually learn in the universities in medicine or in psychology.
Right. So please correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I understand from what you said, is that the way health is conceived, this would include health on a broader spectrum, but so not just mental health, is that it's directly linked to the way you live, not a set of signs and symptoms that would define mental health, but the way you're actually
Yeah,
living in your environment that would include your social structure, your environmental structure, and beyond. So, really, quite
yeah,
a cohesive definition of what health and healthy living is.
yeah, yeah.
From a practical perspective, if I had to try and adopt some of those ways of living for my mental health, for me to get older in a healthy way, what would I have to do?
We observe that there are a lot of issues that conflicts with this healthy living.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, after the invasion and colonization, the communities faces a lot of difficulties in order to keep this healthy way of living. So we understand that a way to cultivate healthy is to understand how coloniality creates trouble in our way of living, and how can we create or resist or deal with it, trying to not keeping the same in the sense of not changing anything,
Mm-hmm.
but how to change together with these new people that are in our environment. So how can we create a healthy way of living together with this colonial power, in the sense of resisting, but also in the sense of transforming it, also in the sense of subverting or creating a social environment that includes it in some sense, and also understanding the threatening aspect of the relationship with these beings and with this other, that's the colonial power. So there are threatening impacts in this relation that we need to acknowledge, and together in the community through this free speech create alternatives.
I wanted to understand a little bit more in terms of how colonization or colonialism and what we still all almost all over the world are left with, how that has affected traditional and cultural practices or ways of living, and then the bigger impact in terms of health. And how do we, like you say, acknowledge that and find ways to coexist, but also make sure that the community stays healthy? Like, how do you actually juggle all of these things?
Yeah, that's a very important question too. We have in Brazil more than 300 indigenous people. They speak 276 different spoken languages. So it's a very diverse community. From the 16th century to the 19th, 18th, 20th century, around 90% of the population were exterminated.
Right.
So we are dealing with the 10% that survived
Mm,
in very bad conditions. Only in the 80s, from the last century, the indigenous people in Brazil started to have the right to live in the land,
right.
in their traditional land, and to have an education based on their tradition, and also a healthcare system that respects their traditions. But it's by the law, by law, to do it, how
Mm,
to educate people respecting their cultural tradition, and how to offer a healthy care support that respects their tradition, because we don't have studies on that, or and not enough, at least. We have few studies, but And so we don't know how it impacts actually from an academic perspective. But the communities, they have a knowledge they produce about how colonialization threatens them. And first, we need to acknowledge it happened, because most of the times it's invisible. People don't know that it happened. It's considered the greatest genocide in the humanity history, the genocide of indigenous people from Americas. 20 million indigenous people were exterminated in Mexico, 18 millions in United States, 10 millions in the Andean countries, 4 millions in Brazil. But we have still a culture, an academic culture, and also a social culture that continues to treat or to consider indigenous people as inferior, uh, people without knowledge or without reasoning, and the colonial impact continues going on. We have the rights by the law, but concretely, it doesn't happen, and we continue. We have the news that the state neglects a lot the indigenous communities. For instance, talking about COVID-19, we have a lot of denounces concerning the how Brazilian state neglects the support, and not only neglects the Brazilian state, also create more challenges for these people to face the pandemic situation.
How does a community heal and recover after all of that? Right? Because, like you're saying now, health is not separate from the social environment and from the bigger environment around that. But how does a community recover from that? Let's say we're not going to change. I'm just putting it out there. Let's say we're not going to change the power structures around, right? You still want the community to recover and thrive. So how do you do that given all these factors?
It's very interesting that we see sometimes some reports of an indigenous woman or indigenous man saying that when they became aware about all this colonial situation, and when they started to get engaged in the resistance of their communities to the threatening impact of the coloniality that persists until nowadays, they started to understand better the meaning of their tradition and to cultivate it and to create a supportive atmosphere. So it's only through this awareness that we can see and understand how it impacts in the daily life, in the some very small experiences where this threatening is present, and we can identify the situation and create possibilities to overcome. In each community is different, these
Right.
impacts. Each community, we have different realities. As I told you, we have more than 300 different people, 276 spoken language. So, and we have a country that's a very big country. You have
Mm-hmm.
indigenous people in the big cities. We have indigenous people in the
Mm.
forest. So we have indigenous people facing the landowners in conflict. So all these situations demands a very singular community process. What is regular is to cultivate a process that sustains this awareness, the construction of this awareness, and the collective elaboration of the solutions.
Right. So, an understanding of the impact that colonization had, and even if it wasn't colonization per se, the impact of the change in in the traditional and cultural structure of these communities, and how that then had an impact, and finding ways to make different parts of that resilient. And as you said before, not in a looking at it in terms of prehistorically, but what's appropriate right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Given that, and given the work I'm doing, do you know what the average life expectancy would be for Indigenous communities? I understand that it's a very big group, so there may not be those figures, but is there an average life
Yeah.
expectancy?
In Brazil, the life expectancy for indigenous people are the worst. No,
Mm.
data also from the World Bank. Yeah, it's indigenous people life expectancy is up to 20 years lower than the life expectancy of non-indigenous people worldwide.
Why do you think that is?
It's a data from the World Bank, and in the same report they say that it's because of the legacy of inequality and exclusion. Yeah, it's the legacy of colonialization, and it's also because of the persistent coloniality. Because when we talk about coloniality, it's because our countries are supposedly they became independent countries, but the colonial power continues affecting the original population. So we have the reproduction of the colonial power now within the social structures in the independent countries. So it's the persistence of this social structure of oppression from local elites to the indigenous people.
Right. So I guess really changing it does involve actually changing what's making this unequal and what's excluding Indigenous people.
Well, we have this layer concerning healthy issues, but we also have local layers, as I was talking, that because of the difference from each community. So in Brazil, we understand that the projects for healthy support depends on the ability of the healthy agency and the professionals to include the indigenous community in the decisions about what are the adequate procedures in every situation. So we have a situation in Brazil that first the indigenous person that when they are not feeling well, the person goes to the shaman. They can decide that sometimes it's relevant to go to the doctor. So it's a joint decision. They talk and they evaluate together the situation, and they combine the treatments. That's from my point of view, the best way to face some very local possibilities to involve the communities in the decisions about the healthy support of someone or a family or all the
So
community.
what you're saying is that the medical doctor and the shaman would actually work together to solve the health issue with the individual?
Yes, we have some cases in Brazil that the hospital has a space, a room, where the shaman could come and also give his support, and also in the hospital working with the two health systems, and they could sort of combine it. And of course they are based or grounded on very different conceptions, but we as indigenous people, we understand that we don't exclude the knowledge Western tradition brings. It's important. The problem is that usually the healthy care system from the government or from the private agencies, they exclude the indigenous.
We have to find a way for the two systems to work together, is what I'm hearing. And I think even more, if you look at healthy health promotion, you're going to have to find a way for the two systems to work together. particularly as you were saying, coming back to themes that you mentioned in terms of colonization and its after effects and alienation from our ways of living, what we eat, how we think, how we relate to each other, and then how that then has an impact on our health, what illnesses that ends up causing, and then how to make these two systems work together. So there's quite a few challenges there in terms of how we actually go about doing this.
A lot of challenges. In many layers, I think I see it. In a broad sense, how can we create public policies that consider and respect this diversity of conceptions? And I would say another layer is about academic, how we train these professionals to be able to actually dialogue with the other, because we have an academic training, a professional training that creates usually distance between the professionals and the specialized knowledge and the knowledge from the communities, and treats the knowledge from the communities as myth, in the sense of something that are not true, because the valued, socially valued, and also institutionally valued knowledge is the scientific. So we have a struggle in the sense of introducing our cosmo views in science, to dialogue with the scientists and to dialogue with the training of the professionals. And we have another layer that's very concrete, that is, sometimes I have hidden in my body or in my mind and body some prejudice, and I'm actually not really open, not because I don't know that I should be open, but because sometimes the person are not effectively able to deal with a very different situation from the situation this person is familiar with. We have in Brazil sometimes many people that they have an indigenous background, but they are not actually able to talk about it. It's a sort of taboo, because colonialization also colonializes our feelings, you know. So we have a challenge in different layers of to attack or to face.
So, as I'm approaching healthy aging, there's lots of different communities, lots of different challenges. Also, an approach to healthy aging would be different, right? How would you describe healthy aging? Like, what would be important for me to consider as I do this, given your work and your work with different communities?
That's a very important issue our communities reflect on. How we deal with people that are getting old and how we value them in the communities. We are used to say that the elders from a community, they are our libraries. They have all the knowledge because we are oral traditions.
Mm.
So is the experience of that person through life. Getting old, it means also getting more knowledge. So the elders are the wise people also in the communities, and they have a central role. Young people need to make a decision. They are always included in the community process of and life in all sense. Some persons from the indigenous communities, they approach me horrified about how the people in the cities treat the people that are getting old, sometimes isolating them in an institution. They don't give the value these people
Mm.
have, as if the old people are unnecessary or
Mm.
create trouble for the families that need to work, and they need to spend money to take care of this person that from the family that are getting old, so and so on. So healthy aging for us is including all people from the very beginning, from the children and the adults and the elders in a participatory process and social decision, and also understanding that there is a sort of cycle, the cycle of life, and respecting this cycle and not creating distance. Our society isolate people, isolate the children, and the children spend a lot of time in the schools far from the parents, and isolate the elders. And it doesn't work for us in the sense of health aging.
Very, very well said. I think what's happened is, well, this is just my opinion, but there's an knowledge has no value unless it has an economic value. And so once it has no economic value currently, I'm just saying in many societies, the people who have this knowledge have no value and so get pushed onto the edges of society, whether it's older people or other forms of knowledge, as you were saying. This knowledge is not valued and respected as, and people who have this knowledge and are not valued and respected. So very, very well said in terms of how the communities can approach healthy aging in a different way, actually, given the insights from your work. What would a healthy brain be? Like, how would you define brain health?
For me, from my understanding, the brain is part of the whole body. A healthy brain is together with all the body of a person, that's together with the bodies from the communities, and that's together with the bodies in the environment we live together. So it's different. We don't isolate a brain. This is healthy, this one is not healthy. Because even if from an individual point of view, we could say, oh, okay, it's not working very well sometimes, or we see the image, there is some black dots in the image that we identify it as
Yes.
it's not healthy, but it can be included if it's included in the social process of taking care of each other and participating as it can. The brain, the person, and all the other person, they can create a healthy way of living together. They participate, actively participate in the cultivation of a community that addressing life, addressing happiness, addressing, and also learning about this. If someone is not very well, is not feeling well, it's not actually something, a thing that needs to be excluded or avoided, because we learn from all these situations.
So basically, not to separate again in terms of this way of thinking, like a healthy brain is separate from a healthy person, is separate from a healthy community, a healthy nation. Everything really is linked. And I think that comes throughout this conversation with you, actually. The value of spirituality for health, is it necessary? And if so, why?
We understand that spirituality is everywhere. It's not something like also separated or something that we do in a certain period of the year or a certain period of the day. Our life is connected with spirituality. Even Western psychology is based on this notion of psyche, that's also translated as soul.
Okay.
That in the scientific language system, it became mind. Some psychological systems avoid the idea of mind and only work with behavior because it's possible to see and to measure. And mind and subjectivities, sometimes it escapes our possibilities to measure. But that's a process in the scientific field, in the sense of exclude what doesn't fit the scientific method. But it doesn't mean that what is excluded doesn't exist. It's only a thing that is not possible to be observed through the scientific method. So what I'm trying to say is that even if we consider psychology as a Western science, spirituality is there.
Right.
And when we go to the communities, the indigenous communities we have here, or from our cosmo views, spirituality is always there. There is no difference between a healthy way of living and cultivating spirituality.
Excellent. Thank you. And again, I think the thread throughout this conversation is nothing is separate. Everything is whole, everything is cohesive. We can't ignore one part if we actually want the whole to be healthy.
Yes.
Do you have any message for my viewers on how they can be healthier? What message would you want to give my viewers?
Be connected with your family, with your community, get aware about how coloniality is participating in our life, even sometimes in a hidden way. And the decision is not to exclude a thing, but how to create better relationships between different things that are part of ourselves, socially speaking, together with the other in the environment, but also personally speaking, and how it's part of our body, our thinking, because we are constituted in the society, in the cultural environment, and all these aspects influences who we are personally. I think it's important to make an effort to produce dialogue between differences instead of silencing one aspect or other aspect.
Excellent. Thank you. That's wonderful advice, actually. And so dialogue internally and externally in terms of the different aspects.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Danilo. That was really an excellent discussion. I think we're going to get so much value from this discussion in terms of our understanding of health, how we promote health and healthy aging.
Thank you very much for inviting me. And yes, I'm open to continue dialoguing in other opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining this discussion on Indigenous wisdom for better health. There were so many valuable insights from Danilo, and I know this is going to change my approach to the work I'm doing and help me to live better and live healthier. I hope this inspires you to think about what you have within your tradition, within your culture, within your way of living that could support better mental health, better brain health, and healthy aging. I hope to see you at the next one.